Wilhelm in control. Dismissal of Bismarck. Bismarck resigned at Wilhelm II's insistence in 1890, at the age of 75, to be succeeded as Chancellor of Germany and Minister-President of Prussia by Leo von Kuprevi, who in turn was replaced by Ludwig, Prince of Hohenlohe-Schillingsfürst, in 1894. Following the dismissal of Hohenlohe in 1900, Wilhelm appointed the man whom he regarded as his own Bismarck, Bernhard von Bülow. In foreign policy, Bismarck had achieved a fragile balance of interests between Germany, France and Russia. Peace was at hand and Bismarck tried to keep it that way despite growing popular sentiment against Britain, regarding colonies, and especially against Russia. With Bismarck's dismissal, the Russians now expected a reversal of policy in Berlin, so they quickly came to terms with France, beginning the process that by 1914 largely isolated Germany. 12.
And so, of course, again, here's another example of revisionist history, partly true and partly false, which is leading into saying, which this whole Bismarck did a lot of, good in some ways to secure the peace. And of course we see in this section the writer slowly and gradually trying to bring you into the idea that Germany started the war and that they're at fault and they're guilty, which is false. The plans at work for war against Germany were in the woodworks for a long time. They wanted a war with Germany. They wanted to isolate Germany. Britain wanted to encircle Germany. Which Germany wasn't responsible for the war, but the foes, they started to fight, and Germany responded back in defense. And knowing about history, of course, a lot of that was clouded back then, but knowing about history, from my experience, knowing the attitude, some of the attitudes of Great Britain during that time, some of the attitudes of the French and the attitudes of Russia being a very dictatorial type of government who wanted to dominate its workers, didn't care too much about their situation, which led to the Bolshevik Revolution, wanting the military men in Russia wanting to feed the people in the army garbage, meat with bugs all over it, maggots, and so forth, slowly and gradually led to the overthrowing of Russia and the killing of the Tsar family. But at the same time, Kaiser Wilhelm tried to advise in early years Russia on taking more serious about the working classes and those in the military army, to respect their needs, to make changes. Again, you got to realize too, we are looking back in history from our perspective and our thoughts and our thinking of today. And we must realize that people back then were a product of their own time. And Germany was trying to do his best, at the same time being a product of his time, to bring Germany into the 20th century, to improve education, science, arts, and a supporter of arts and concerns for the working classes. And knowing that France was a hotbed of radicalists, revolutionists, and Russia being a hotbed of revolutionists, Karl Marx, Marxism, communism, socialism in the woodworks, and anti-Christian values were in the works, which led to the destabilization of Europe, which we are today in the world. Had Germany won the war, we would have had a lot stabler Europe. Of course, Russia trading in one dictator for a number, which eventually led to the Soviet Union. What's his name? What is his name? I forgot. Not Lenin. Stalin killed Lenin because there was a different disagreement of opinions.
In appointing Koprivi and then Hohenlohe, Wilhelm was embarking upon what is known to history as the new course, in which he hoped to exert decisive influence in the government of the empire. There is debate amongst historians as to the precise degree to which Wilhelm succeeded in implementing personal rule in this era, but what is clear is the very different dynamic which existed between the crown and its chief political servant, the chancellor, in the Wilhelmine era. These chancellors were senior civil servants and not seasoned politician-statesmen like Bismarck. Wilhelm wanted to preclude the emergence of another iron chancellor, whom he ultimately detested as being a boorish old killjoy who had not permitted any minister to see the emperor except in his presence, keeping a stranglehold on effective political power. Upon his enforced retirement and until his dying day, Bismarck was to become a bitter critic of Wilhelm's policies, but without the support of the supreme arbiter of all political appointments, the emperor, there was little chance of Bismarck exerting a decisive influence on policy.
Partly true and partly false. The German Empire really didn't, or the emperor didn't really have much control, really, because Bismarck created more control in the chancellorship and so forth. So he didn't really have much control because the empire was a constitutional empire, and the emperor didn't have much control in the policies and so forth. He had some power and he had some other powers. And of course, political rivalries. Kaiser Wilhelm II, Bismarck, obviously I don't know if I'd say there's a bitterly anger attitudes from one another. Obviously had a political disagreement, but they were still friends, and they reconciled some of their friction and so forth. So Kaiser Wilhelm II can't be responsible for all the policies that were made because he didn't have the influence and control, like in some ways, like today, the Queen of England doesn't really have any control or influence in the policies. And I believe that kings and monarchs should have a little bit more power, a little bit more influence. But as I always said, and always believe, that I believe in constitutional monarch, constitutional empire, and I believe in the restoration of the monarchs of Europe again. And that America should, I believe in the restoration of the Republic of America. And I'm going to do everything in my power and what efforts I can as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ to try to bring forth the restoration and renewal of the monarchs of Europe, the restoration of constitutional monarchs of Europe. By doing so, we will have a more stable world. And God has from the beginning, since the Old Testament, has always intended the European monarchs to stay in control of the world affairs. And I'll, of course, get to that from a scripture point. Down with communism, down with socialism, down with Marxism, down with radical, fanatical, leftist. And let the rise of the great European monarchs be restored. Down with fascism, down with Nazism. They are destroying and making a mockery of our world. Those Kenites, those radical, fanatical Kenites, those Zionists. And what is a Zionist? A Zionist is a Kenite. There's a difference between a Kenite and descendants of the house of Judah, and I'll show you that here in a little while. Let's continue.